There was a smell to those pubs. Not a bad smell, not exactly. It was coal smoke and stale bitter and wet wool drying on the backs of chairs. All of it soaked so deep into the plaster and the woodwork that even a Monday morning with the doors flung open couldn't shift it. You'd walk in at 6:30 on a Tuesday in February, the frost still crackling on the pavement outside, your fingers white and numb from the walk from the factory gates, and that smell hit you like a warm hand on the back of the neck. It told you that you were somewhere, that somebody knew you were coming. That somebody was usually Stan or Derek or Margaret and her husband Ray, who worked the bar together every single night from 6 until 11, rain or shine, Christmas Eve included. They lived upstairs. That's the part people forget now, they lived there. The pub wasn't a job they drove to, it was their home, and you were allowed inside it. The bedroom was directly above the public bar. You could hear their alarm clock if the pub was quiet enough on a slow Wednesday. Their children did their homework at the end of the bar and went to the same school as yours. That was the tied house system, and for the best part of 200 years, it was the backbone of British working-class life. A tied house meant the landlord or landlady, because more often than not it was a partnership. A husband and wife operation was tied to a specific brewery. They didn't own the pub outright. The brewery owned the building, and the landlord paid rent and agreed to sell only that brewery's beers. In return, they got a home, a livelihood, and a position in the community that carried a quiet, unspoken authority. Bass Charrington, Watney Man, Ind Coop, Tetley, these were the names printed on the pump clips, and the names on the tenancy agreements that shaped entire neighbourhoods. By the mid-1970s, roughly 3/4 of all pubs in England and Wales were tied houses. In some industrial towns in the North and the Midlands, the figure was higher still. And the prices, God, the prices. In 1970, a pint of bitter in an ordinary working-class pub cost somewhere between 1 shilling and 9p and 2 shillings. When decimalisation came in February 1971, that translated to roughly 9p to 10p a pint. By 1975, inflation had pushed it up to around 22p. By 1979, following the oil crisis and the chaos of the winter of discontent, you were looking at 35 to 40p. It felt steep at the time. It feels almost incomprehensible now. But even at those prices, for a bloke on a factory wage or a building site wage, the pub was accessible. It was affordable in a way that the world simply doesn't allow anymore. What you were paying for wasn't just the beer. You need to understand that. The beer was almost incidental. What you were paying for was access. Access to warmth, to company, to a room where your name was known and your usual was poured before you'd finished unbuttoning your coat. The landlord held a tab for the regulars. Not a formal credit arrangement, nothing written down in a ledger by a head office somewhere, just a man's word and a landlord who trusted it. "I'll sort you Friday, Ray. No bother, love. It's there when you're ready." That was the entire transaction. No credit check, no late payment fee, no automated reminder text at 9 in the morning. Just human trust, built up over years of turning up and being decent. And the tab was the least of it. The landlord was the first person to know when a marriage was in trouble because the husband started coming in earlier and staying later. He was the first to know when someone had lost their job because the man suddenly started nursing a single pint for 90 minutes instead of getting a round in. He knew which families were struggling before the council did, before the social workers did, before the neighbours had worked up the nerve to ask. He didn't report it, didn't gossip with it, he just quietly adjusted. Put a bit extra on the sandwich, let the tab run a week longer, said nothing direct, because direct wasn't the way it was done, but made sure the man knew he wasn't invisible. Margaret at the Anchor on our street was like that. She'd been behind that bar since 1961. She and Ray had taken over the tenancy from the previous couple, who'd run it since the war. There was a continuity to it, a generational thread you could hold in your hands. She knew everyone's father. She knew who had served where, who had come back changed, who had never really come back at all even though their body had. She knew which bloke's wife had left, which son had got into trouble, which daughter had done something the family was quietly proud of. And she held all of that knowledge with the same care you'd hold something fragile. She didn't use it. She just held it. And the knowing of it made her presence in that room feel like a form of safety. That was the real function of the tied house landlord. Not publican, not licensee, not hospitality professional. What a wretched, hollowed-out phrase that is. They were the secular chaplains of the working class. They performed a pastoral function that nobody had asked them to perform, that nobody paid them extra to perform, that the brewery certainly didn't train them for. They just absorbed it because the job required it, and they were the sort of people who didn't walk away from what was required. The physical space of those pubs mattered too, in a way that's hard to explain to someone who only knows the open-plan gastropub. The old tied house had rooms, proper rooms, with doors between them. The public bar was at the front, cheapest drinks, darts board on the wall, lino on the floor, a coal fire in the grate from October through to April. The smell of that fire, the particular sulphurous bite of a sea coal fire just catching, the orange warmth of it, throwing shadows across the nicotine-yellow ceiling. That smell is gone from most of Britain now, banned by clean air zones and smokeless fuel regulations, and its absence is a physical thing you can feel in winter. You step out of the cold into a modern pub, and there is central heating. Yes, but there is no fire. There is warmth, but there is no heat, if you follow the distinction. Behind the public bar was the snug, sometimes called the tap room or the best room, where the women sat. This wasn't segregation in any cruel sense, it was simply how people organized themselves, a social grammar that everyone understood. Women could come into the public bar, and in most pubs by the 1970s they did, especially on a Friday night. But the snug was quieter, smaller, more private, a place where two women could sit with a babicham and a gin and tonic and talk about things they wouldn't want shouted across a bar full of men fresh off the late shift. Margaret tended to the snug herself. Ray handled the public bar. It was a division of labor so natural and so practiced that it required no discussion. They'd been doing it for 15 years without ever having to agree to it. What was it actually like to drink in those places on an ordinary night, a Thursday, say, in the winter of 1974, the year the 3-day week bit hardest? The power cuts were coming in blocks, 9 hours without electricity on rotation, the government rationing energy because the miners' strike had left the power stations running on skeleton coal stocks. You'd walk to the pub in the dark, streetlights off on the alternate blackout schedule, and the pub would be lit with candles and oil lamps that Margaret had dug out of the cellar. The beer was fine. Beer doesn't need electricity to flow. The fire was going. The room was warm and bright in that particular orange, flickering way that electric light has never been able to replicate. And in those candlelit rooms, with the whole country feeling like it was falling apart at the seams, there was a sense of solidarity that was almost tangible. You could reach out and touch it. People talked to each other in those blackouts. Not just the people they'd come in with, strangers at the bar, men you'd nodded at for years without knowing their names, women from the other end of the street. The darkness outside and the warmth inside created a kind of enforced intimacy. And the landlord moved through it all, topping up glasses, lighting candles from the stubs of old ones, making sure nobody sat alone in the corners. That was the job. You couldn't train for it. You either had the instinct or you didn't. What was your local like in those years? Do you remember the name of the man or woman who poured your dad's pint every Friday? The one who knew the family's news before the family did? Let me know down in the comments, because I think about those people more than I expected to, and I don't think they get nearly enough credit for what they actually were. The summer of 1976, the hottest summer in Britain since records began, temperatures hitting 95 degrees Fahrenheit in some parts of England. The lawns burnt brown by July, standpipes in the streets by August. That summer tested the tied house system in a different way. Beer sales went through the roof. The breweries were struggling to keep up with demand, and the pubs were heaving every evening, queues 3 deep at the bar, the landlords working 14-hour days and then falling into their beds above the noise of the last stragglers on the pavement. Ray put on 3 stone that summer, Margaret said later, because the only food he had time to eat was the sandwiches she made between pulling pints. He ate them standing up, behind the bar, with his back to the customers so they couldn't see. The breweries noticed the profits that summer. They noticed them very carefully. And they began to think, as large organizations always begin to think when they notice profits, about how to extract more of them. The tied house system had been profitable for the breweries for a long time, but it had also involved a certain tolerance, a tolerance for landlords who ran their houses their own way, who held tabs and bent rules and put the community above the margin. The breweries were beginning to wonder whether that tolerance was commercially necessary. By the early 1980s, the big six breweries, Bass, Allied Breweries, Watney Man and Truman, Whitbread, Courage, and Scottish and Newcastle between them, owned or tied over 75% of all British pubs. The Competition Commission, then called the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, was paying close attention. In 1989, after years of review and lobbying and counter-lobbying, the Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher enacted the Supply of Beer, Tied Estate. Order what the trade came to call simply the beer orders. The stated intention was to break up the big breweries' monopoly and give consumers more choice. In practice, it told the six major breweries that they could not own or tie more than 2,000 pubs each. Any pubs over that limit had to be sold off or freed from the tie within 3 years. The scale of what followed is difficult to fully appreciate unless you were watching it happen from inside a community that relied on those pubs. Bass alone had over 7,000 tied houses before the beer orders. Whitbread had nearly 6,000. Allied had close to 7,000. The sell-offs were enormous, tens of thousands of individual pubs changing hands in the space of a few years. The tenancy agreements that had structured the lives of the people who ran them suddenly renegotiated or terminated. Some landlords bought their pubs outright and became free houses if they had the capital. Many did not. The pubs that the big breweries were forced to sell were bought, in enormous numbers, by a new kind of company, the pubco. The pubco was a property company wearing a pub company's clothes. It didn't brew beer. It had no heritage connection to any particular region, any particular community, any particular bar. It bought the freehold of the buildings, and it ran them on lease agreements that loaded enormous costs onto the individual landlord, not only high rents, but the requirement to buy beer, wine, and spirits at above-market prices directly from the pubco's nominated suppliers, a system that replicated the worst aspects of the old brewery tie without any of the paternalistic protections. Enterprise Inns, Punch Taverns, Spirit Group, these were the names that replaced Bass, Charrington and Tetley on the lease agreements, and they were names that meant nothing to the man nursing his bitter at the bar on a Friday night, except that his landlord now looked tired in a different way, a worried way. The margins under the pubco leases were brutal. A tied house landlord in 1975 might have cleared a modest but livable income, perhaps £5,000 to £7,000 a year, the equivalent of around £50,000 to £70,000 in today's money, with accommodation included. By the mid-2000s, pubco leaseholders were frequently clearing less than £15,000 a year in actual profit after the rent and the beer tie costs were accounted for, in a business that was supposed to be running full-time with 2 people working every single day. The live-in arrangement, which had once been a perk, you lived where you worked, your home was always warm, became a trap. You couldn't leave at the end of a shift because there was no end of the shift. The pub was always there, always demanding, and the money was never enough. The couples who had once been the Margarets and Rays of their streets, the ones with the instinct, the ones who knew everyone's name and held the community together by sheer force of human decency, those people couldn't survive that model. They handed back the keys. Some went quietly, with a final lock-in and a few tears and a handshake at the bar on a Sunday afternoon. Some went bitterly, having lost everything they'd put into the place, the years and the savings and the goodwill that the pubco would simply write off or ignore. The boards went up on the windows, the cellars went cold. The chalkboards with the prices went yellow and curled at the corners. The numbers tell their own story, and they are stark numbers. In 1980, there were approximately 69,000 pubs in the United Kingdom. By 2010, there were around 52,000. By 2020, that figure had fallen below 47,000. The campaign for real ale began tracking pub closures formally in the early 2000s and found that at the peak of the pubco crisis, Britain was losing somewhere between 25 and 30 pubs every single week. Not 25 or 30 per year. Per week. Some were converted to flats, you can spot them easily enough. The old pub proportions, still visible in the shape of the building, the ghost of a sign on the brickwork, the big windows now fitted with blinds. Some became restaurants, Indian takeaways, estate agents. Some simply stood empty, the cellars filling with water, the bars still intact behind the chipboard. The 2008 financial crisis accelerated everything. Credit dried up, discretionary spending collapsed, and the pubco model, already under enormous strain, began to fracture at the foundations. Punch Taverns, at its peak the second largest pubco in Britain with over 8,000 pubs in its estate, had accumulated over £3 billion in debt financing its acquisitions. When the financial crisis hit, those debt structures began to implode. The company restructured repeatedly through the 2010s, selling off estates in chunks. Enterprise Inns, similarly leveraged, followed a parallel path. The pubs at the bottom of these corporate towers, the Anchors and the Red Lions and the working men's clubs on the corners of streets nobody had ever heard of outside the postcode, bore the consequences of boardroom decisions made in offices that none of their regulars would ever have occasion to visit. And through all of it, the thing that was actually lost was not the beer. The beer survived, craft beer, real ale, microbreweries. The beer is arguably better now than it has ever been. What was lost was the person behind the bar who had been there for 15 years and intended to be there for 15 more. What was lost was the continuity, the human connective tissue between a street and its pub, between a community and the place where it processed its grief and its joy and its ordinary weekday tedium. The bloke who lost his job at the steelworks and came in on a Tuesday at 11 when the pub opened, not because he was an alcoholic, but because Ray would see his face and know, without a word being said, that something needed to be done about it. That function was not replaced. The Weatherspoon that opened in the old Woolworths building in the High Street Cheap Pints, laminate floors, no landlord who knows your name does not perform that function, and it never will, because it was never designed to. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a town when its last proper local closes. Not an absence of noise, the traffic still moves, the people still walk past, the other shops carry on. It is a social silence. A silence in the fabric of how people relate to one another. The men who used to see each other every Thursday evening now don't see each other at all, because there is nowhere to coincidentally be at the same time. The woman who used to get half an hour of conversation and a glass of stout on a Saturday lunchtime before the shops shut, now gets her shopping delivered to the door and speaks to nobody. The retired miner who sat in the corner with his paper and his pint and was known by name by everyone in the room, he sits at home now. He is fine, probably, but he is alone in a way he wasn't before, and the aloneness is a different weight. The tied house landlord is almost gone now. Not entirely, there are still tenanted pubs, still couples running tied houses for regional breweries in parts of Yorkshire and Lancashire and the West Midlands, still the occasional Ray and Margaret holding on by the sheer force of what they believe the job is supposed to be. But they are fighting against a current that has been running against them for 30 years, and the current is strong. The economics are against them, the planning regulations increasingly favour conversion, the supermarkets sell a 4-pack of lager for less than the price of a single pint. The world has been rearranged around the logic of the individual transaction, the cheapest unit cost, the maximum convenience, and the tied house landlord. With his tab book and his coal fire and his knowledge of every family on the street, does not fit inside that logic at all. We did not lose a type of pub, we lost a type of person. We lost the people who lived above the bar and knew what day your wife's birthday was and kept a whiskey back when you'd had a particularly bad week, not because it was profitable, but because that was what the job meant to them. We traded that for what, exactly? For the ability to drink a gin and tonic on a Tuesday afternoon in a building that was once a bank, served by someone on a 0-hours contract who has never seen you before and will not remember your name. The convenience is real, The loneliness is also real. And on a winter night, when the cold comes in off the street and you push open a door and the warmth inside has no memory of you, you feel the difference. You feel exactly what it is that has gone.